I would like to think we all know the risks when we do this stuff, but it's still brutal because you're celebrating and your family's proud of you and all this, and it's one of the biggest days of your life. And for some family, it's the worst day of their life. They've lost their brother or their son, or you know what I mean? So it's tough. You know you'll get through it, but that shouldn't be your first experience of suffering, something that you can bloody die in, you know?
He had a seizure, and the next thing you know, everyone starts screaming.
This is dedicated to all the single moms.
Not being able to breathe enough, or being able to breathe just about enough, but having a horrible mask on your face, and the latter option is marginally better than
Johnny, how are you, mate?
Good, buddy. Good. Back in Thailand and relaxing.
First off, mate, mega congrats on your Everest summit. I was following a fellow former Royal Marine colleague of mine on his attempt, and got all the way up to the top camp. And he'd had a stomach bug the whole time, and he just had to call it. Two of his team went up and only one of them come back down. So it's a serious old business, isn't it?
That's it. I know it gets a lot of negative media these days, but there's no soft people getting to the top. Or if there are, I certainly never saw them. It's tougher. Just because you see all these famous photographs with lots of people and stuff up there now, people assume that, like, you read about, it's just a plaything for the rich and all this, but it's not. It's brutal. It's really brutal still.
Is it strange seeing all those bodies up there?
Yeah, it's strange, of course. And when there's some famous ones that have been there for a while, and that kind of feels a bit more like you've read about it in books or heard about them in documentaries, and it's still tough because it's someone's brother or father, but that feels quite distant. But, like, for example, there was a Nepali guy who died on the day that I summited, and he had run out of oxygen and suffocated, and he was just hanging off the rope, and that just happened a few hours earlier, and that is like infinitely more harrowing than like a famous body from 20 years ago, you know? Yeah, it's tough. I guess, I would like to think we all know the risks when we do this stuff, but it's still brutal because you're celebrating and your family's proud of you and all this, and it's one of the biggest days of your life. And for some family, it's the worst day of their life. They've lost their brother or their son, or you know what I mean? So it's tough, but I'm sure that guy knew what he was signing up for too. It's sad.
Yes, I must say it puts a different angle on it once you become a parent.
I bet.
Simply because statistically, I don't know what the current statistic is, but it used to be for every 10 people that got up, only 9 people made it back down, and that's you got to consider that as a parent,
This year there was about 450 permits, and like 100 quit. 100 people quit, or 25% or so quit before you're even a month in. Some people are unprepared. This whole thing with rich people's play thing, they never make it high up the mountain. Those kind of people, they're long gone after they see it. They're like, oh shit, this is serious. People are dying. So a lot of people quit early on. So I think out of the 450, maybe 200 or 250 summits or something like that, and 15 died. So that's still a really brutal. Even with all the health and safety and the quality oxygen and the quality gear, it's still not a great number, is it?
No, it's not. And do you think fitness comes into it? I mean, obviously you have to have a base fitness to even consider that sort of thing, but they do say that high altitude sickness it can affect anybody.
Yeah, they do say that. It's quite generous. It can affect anyone, of course, but fitness is massive. I feel like I trained so hard for years, actually. And like I've beasted myself every morning, running 50K every morning up this mountain beside my house here in Thailand. And I feel like everyone should be capable of running like an ultramarathon, for example. If you're going to do bloody Everest, you should be able to run 100K or 100 miles. You know what I mean? You should be in the best shape of your life. So fitness certainly plays a part. I saw some people who were wrecked on that mountain, like people are just collapsing. I think they should make the criteria to get your permit granted harder. Like I went with a really good operator called Furtenbach Adventures. They're like quite expensive West European, Austrian guy who owns it. And they're really strict about who they accept. I was terrified when I applied to go with them in case they turned me down because they're so successful. I was like, God, I really want to get with these guys. Whereas a lot of the local operators will just take the 40 grand from some person who's barely been on a mountain before. I've got a really sad story. I met an Indian lady who's 59. I was going just at the bottom of the Khumbu icefall. We were just staying active while the weather was bad. And I bumped into her. And she had a photograph of herself on her helmet, like printed out on a printer and sellotape to the front. So I stopped and talked to her. I was like, oh, congratulations for getting to Everest base camp. It's because the Khumbu Icefall is near the base camp, right? So we hadn't gone further than that yet, or she hadn't. We had done one rotation. And I started speaking to her because she was like a kind of older lady, a bit overweight Indian lady. And I was like, well done, wow, it's amazing you made it to base camp. She's like, no, I'm here to climb the mountain. And I was like, oh, okay. And then she said, read my helmet. And it said pacemaker. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, oh, I want to be the first person with a pacemaker to make it to the summit of Everest. And this is like an overweight 59-year-old woman who wouldn't be able to run a 5K. You know what I mean? Mm. And I was like, wow, okay. And the two Sherpas, she'd hired two Sherpas. She was obviously very wealthy. And I was looking at the Sherpa like, wow, really? Are you guys going to take this lady up? And then I went back to our own base camp, like my operator's base camp, to have dinner that night. And I was telling everyone, like, guys, I saw this lady who did really well to get to base camp, but like that should be the end of her trip. Like it was pretty mad, but she's apparently, and explained the story that I just told you here. And then last week I found out she died. Yeah, and I mean that's the reality.
It's funny. You just reminded me. I did a Marathon Des Sables last month.
Oh, nice! I've done that myself.
Yeah, well, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to... what year did you do it?
2019.
Okay. So I asked that specifically because 2021 was a particularly tough year for it.
I remember reading about it. You can see my medal there. You see the one with the red? That's the Marathon Des Sables one. You're the same one, I'm sure.
Congratulations. Yeah, similar.
Yeah, I heard it was like a really brutal sand dune section. We also had their longest sand dune section, but I think you guys had the hottest section, the hottest on record, which is obviously horrific.
Yeah. 52 degrees.
I mean, you do sign up to do a desert in the Sahara, so I mean, anyone listening is probably not too sympathetic for either of us. But you get what you pay for, don't you?
I'm just really bad at judging all these kind of things. You know, I'll enter anything, and I'm never going to give up. You know, so I always kind of know.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I will be honest, this was brutal, and there were times where if I didn't get a shift on, I would have been. You know, you've only got a certain cutoff time. You don't want to leave it too long in those. You know, when you get your water and that sort of thing. But the very first night after we were running, I just happened to be stood outside our Bedouin tent, and I'm looking at a chap as he died.
Dehydration?
He had a seizure. He had a seizure, and the next thing you know, everyone starts screaming, and the medics come rushing over, and they were screaming for, I think it was midazolam to stop him seizuring. But then the next thing, the medics just jumping on his chest. So he'd obviously stopped, his heart had stopped. And fortunately, they got him alive again.
Wow.
And they've always got two choppers on hand there that they just sort of attach to the race. I don't know how they fund them, because it must be bloody expensive to have two choppers for 11 days. But you do stand there and you think, bloody hell, that's someone's partner or dad or son, and they don't know he's going. And it does it does get you thinking, hey?
You just did it there recently, right? April, right?
Yeah.
My mate, I had a Scottish mate. He used to be an alcoholic and he was big into his running. He was there as well, actually. But he dropped out on day 2 with dehydration. And he's a bit of a beast as well.
Well, that was the thing I was going to come on to. Is in the mornings you get this big queue of people with their backpacks, and I thought they knew something I didn't know. You know, like there's free beer over there or something. And then the guy in my tent went, no, Chris, they've all dropped out. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
what? Why would they, but they can still walk, you know, but this is the thing. And a couple of the guys that were in my tent didn't come back from the second, or they came back from the second day, but they're like, nah, that's it. It's bizarre situation, you know?
Yeah, but you know what I think, Chris? I think with things like Everest and Marathon Des Sables, I feel like they're so famous that people, and also they're quite popular. Like lots of people do it, relatively lots. I mean, not in the grand scheme of 7 billion people, not lots do it, but it seems popular because you see it in the media every year. April, similar time of year as well, MDS and Everest, and it makes people who haven't necessarily cut their teeth on hardcore stuff before sit at home and think, I'm going to fucking do that. I'm going to do the MDS. I'm going to climb Everest. Like, I'm going to be a hero. And absolutely anyone can do these things. For sure they can. But you've got to learn to suffer first. That can't be the first time you suffer, can't be doing one of these epic challenges. You need to lead up to it. Like as I say, doing like 100K, you can do it yourself. You can put your sneakers on and go and do that tomorrow. That'll prepare your, like, physically, of course, too, but mentally, when you get those dark times and you're like, oh God, what am I doing here? I hate myself. I'm crying. Why have I signed up for this? And then you come out the other side and you do that time and time again. And then eventually, when you do something like the MDS or Everest, you know you'll get through it. But that shouldn't be your first experience of suffering, something that you can bloody die in, you know?
Yeah, I only did 10 weeks training because I was actually waiting for a spinal op.
God.
And it managed to just get better towards the end of what was a year off running, really. And so I thought, right, 10 weeks, what can I do? Well, first of all, lose a stone in weight.
Well, it's one less stone you have to carry around, isn't it?
Exactly. You know that straight away. A lot of people look at me and go, what? Did you want to look good in the desert or something? I'm like, no, it's nothing to do with that. Second thing, I booked some sunbeds so that I'm not, I'm not having to worry about, like, sun cream and getting burned and all that sort of thing. The third thing I did, because I'm lucky enough to have a sauna in the garden, is I just tried to spend as long as I could in there. It's quite brutal sauna heat, but I got a step up box in there, and I would just spend an hour and a half if I could, just doing step ups. Sort of, and I was doing step ups at some point at like 50 degrees, going, well, it's never going to get that hot in the desert, so I'm really doing well here. And I could only do an hour and a half, and then I was like, right, screw that, but at least it won't be 50. It's going to be like 30. It was those small things combined with getting out. I only ran like 23 milers. I did a couple of 10 milers. I tried to do a 19 miler, and I just ended up it's too painful when I called my girlfriend to come and pick me up. Could you just talk about money, if you don't mind? How it's not cheap to get up Everest. How does somebody like yourself steal that money?
It's not cheap. And let me, just before I get into that, how I found that, the bloody South Pole in Vincent, where I'm going to in December to finish the 7 summits, that's even more expensive. That's bloody 90 grand US. It's killing me. Everest is about 45, 50 US for a local operator, and kind of 65, 70 if you want a Western operator. So yeah, it's bloody expensive. Yeah, well, like when I'm on my blog, like I'm a blogger by trade, and when I write stuff, or especially if the American media ever pick my story up, which happens now and again, I just get a load of feedback being like, rich white guy with his dad's credit card, here we go. And I'm like, God, my upbringing is very different to that. I come from a single parent, single mother family. Like my father was in prison. We were in a battered woman's home. We ended up having to flee the south of Ireland, change our names, move to the north, like very turbulent childhood. And then we were on the dole on welfare for 10 years, living off 45 quid a week. And I was just always, I just grew up poor, like as poor as you can be in Ireland. And I just remember feeling very restricted. We never went on holiday or any of that sort of stuff until I was like 14, 15, 16. I never been on an airplane until I was like 14 or 15. We didn't have a car or no central heating or any of that. So I just remember feeling very restricted. Like obviously feeling broke as shit, but I felt like even at a young age, I felt like I had no options to do anything, and my mum had no options to do anything because of the finances. So I always wanted to be financially free, always. I mean, I know everyone says that cliche style, but like my personality, when I'm obsessed with something, that's all I'm going to drive towards. And that was just a huge motivation for me my whole life to make sure I was financially free. So anyway, long story short, I started a blog in 2010, and I knew people were making a lot of money from blogs. And I ended up making $2 or $3 million from my blog over a kind of 10, 12 year period. And it's still ticking over nicely today. And then I use that money obviously to help my mum out. And she spends her winters now in Thailand with me here. And yeah, and I've used it to change my life. I've built a big, nice house here in the north of Thailand. I use it to climb Everest, to go to the South Pole and North Pole, and spent a big chunk of it doing a big 11-year journey to every country in the world. But that's how I afford it, from my blog, making money from the blog.
Johnny, for those of us that don't blog, how does one make money from a blog? Is that advertising or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, I could talk about that for 24 hours, but very like layman's terms, advertising. Yes, that's basically the answer. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated about Everest. I would say, I always tell people I've achieved all my dreams. You've traveled to every country on the planet. Pleased, I've traveled to half of them. But I still would like to climb Everest. So I guess I haven't achieved all my dreams, folks, but
it's good to have one still, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what I'm saying is, if I pop my clogs now, I think it's been a life well spent. You know, I got no regrets whatsoever. When you're up there on the high mountain, first of all, were you worried about getting a stomach infection?
It's funny that, because it's quite a common thing. A lot of people, obviously, there's lots of deaths from falling down crevasses and avalanches and falling off the mountain. But in terms of failure, getting sick is probably the number one cause of the failure, more so than these dramatic deaths that you read about. A lot of people fail like your mate, like you get sick. And no, because I did that 11 or 12 years, every country in the world, and I did it on a absolute shoestring budget as I learned how to make money online. So I've been sleeping in bus stations and ports in bloody Central African Republic and Congo for a decade. I've been sick so many times when I first set out for that every country thing, and now I never ever get sick. I've ingested every African, Latin American, European disease imaginable, and I live in Thailand eating street food and all that. And honestly, I never get sick no matter what happens.
Brilliant. I got sick the first day of the marathon. Even before, we still had 2 days before we started running.
And that's what happened to my mate, and that's how he dropped out. Yeah. Was it something that you were thinking about when you were doing it, like in the lead up to it and everything? Like, I hope we don't get sick.
Yeah, I thought the hotter it is when we do it, the more chance of catching a stomach parasite or let's call it a foreign amoeba, isn't it? That's stuff that we're not used to in the UK, and you eat two Bedouin meal, or the Berbers cook you meals for the first 2 nights, and it's bloody delicious. It's like a banquet in a big tent, and you're never going to say no to that, well, not if you're like me. But then, of course, and they give you this tea, and you see them actually touching like the ring of the cup with their fingers, which I don't care about. But what I do know is that the bacteria their stomachs are used to, bearing in mind you're in a country that probably wipe the bum with the hand, again, something I couldn't give a damn about, because as you know and I know, that's what you do in half the world. You do then wash your hand, folks. I should say, you don't walk around with a big brown stain on your hand all day. So I was conscious of it, but the next morning after the very first, and I'm running to these kind of improvised toilets, and it's all just coming out, and you get that horrible smell with it. Like you can just tell something's in your stomach is so alien and wrong. And the good thing is I could throw most of my rations away. You still got to keep a certain calorie a day, but when it comes to eating, I'll just throw it in the bin. I got by on like drinking muesli, Alpen out of a bag in the morning. And eating, I had these 1,000-calorie rehydrated ration packs, and I was just throwing 3/4 of them away. So, but like I say, you don't complain, just get, it wasn't nice to be that ill right from the start, but
sure. But what can you do?
Yeah. So on the high mountain then, did you feel any discomfort from the lack of air up there, this kind of thing?
Yeah, I've been climbing. I don't come from a mountain climbing background. I'm a working class kid. But since I finished my countries and I was trying to do this 7 summit stuff, I've been obviously on a fair few high mountains over the last 4 or 5 years. But I've never used oxygen before. So I've never been above 8,000 meters until Everest. And I think people think, and maybe even me, maybe I thought this until a couple of months ago when I was on the mountain, like wearing that oxygen mask, it's not like a scuba system with oxygen. It only adds like a tiny percentage to what you have. So like when you're at 8,800 meters at the summit of Everest with the oxygen mask, it makes it the equivalent of like, let's say 8,000 meters or 8,300 meters. So there's still cool oxygen, just slightly more, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was really tough, to be honest. And I'm quite a claustrophobic guy, and like I've only done scuba once actually in my life, and was hungover in Australia one time, and I had like a panic attack. I was like, get this fucking thing off me, and I've never done it since. I hate the thought of having masks on me and all that. So actually, when we were climbing, Everest takes about 2 months or 50 to 7 weeks, 50 days, and I knew that once we went above 7,000 meters, that people would be using oxygen. So I had been dreading that the whole time, because I knew that when I was putting that mask on, I was going to hate having it on, especially when you're like, I know you're going slow on Everest because there's very little oxygen, but it feels like you're running because you're so tired and there's not enough oxygen. So I knew I'd be breathing heavy and I'd have this thing stuck on my face. And the first day we got given the oxygen, then I didn't wear it. I did the whole day without it when everyone else was wearing it, because I was so scared of putting it on. And then eventually you get so high that your choice is like not being able to breathe enough, or being able to breathe just about enough, but having a horrible mask on your face. And the latter option is marginally better than the first option. So eventually you have to crack. You have to sleep with it on and everything. So it's pretty tough. And then obviously as you go higher, the oxygen, you've only got so much oxygen that you can, that feeds into your mask. So as you get higher, it still becomes progressively harder. Like I say, people sitting at home might think you put this oxygen mask on and it's being at sea level. It's not. It's brutal. So every step you take, like it's like I run a lot of ultras, and when you're above 8,000, or certainly on summit day, the summit day takes like 12 hours or whatever, right? Something like that. Up and down, maybe 16 hours. So it's quite a long day, and it's freezing and scary, and people are dying, and it's pretty traumatic. And you only go like from base camp, from camp 4, which is high camp, to summit. It's only 2 kilometers. It's like a mile and a bit, and it takes. And these are the fittest people in the world. I'm the fittest I've ever been in my life, and it's taken me 12 hours to do 2 bloody kilometers. Honestly mad. So you do one step, and then you might have to wait 2 or 3 minutes to recover until you do the next step. And the first 30 seconds after each step feels like you're going to die. You're like, and there's just not enough oxygen. So it's pretty awful. And as you're going up, it's really steep as well. And as you're going up, like you might see like a nice, it's steep as hell, but consistent gradient. And then there might be like a set of rocks that you actually have to climb over. And all you're thinking is like, oh, fuck, when I get to those rocks, I'm actually going to have to climb a bit and actually exert myself. And I'm going to be wrecked for 10 minutes after. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happens. But I'm talking about, when I say rocks, it might be something that you would just jump on a boulder to another boulder if you're on the beach. You know what I mean? Like it's nothing. But up there, you're looking at it like, oh no, in an hour I'm going to get there and it's going to be brutal. And it's so mad. And you just feel like you're never getting enough oxygen, of course. And then when you're so exhausted, you want to breathe more and it's just not available. So yeah, it's constantly very claustrophobic, and you just have to try, or I just had to try to stay calm and think, just, can I physically put one foot in front of the other? Yes. Okay. Just do that until you get to the bloody top, and then get the fuck off as quick as you can.
Another ex-Marine chap summited this season, chap called Aldo Kane. He's done a lot of work on TV, and he's friends with a few friends of mine. And he went up with Nims Dye's expedition. Yeah. Nims being the guy, what did he do? All the world's 14 highest peaks in 6 months, knocking 6.5 years off the record.
Been broken since, but yeah.
Yeah, again, Nim's not an ex-Marine, but he was in the SBS, which is the Marine Special Forces, moved there from the Gurkhas. He came on the show after he'd done his final summit, and he predicted a weather window that nobody else had seen this year. And so his guys went up. I've only seen the summit pictures of Aldo and his Sherpa, but they said they had it all to themselves up there. There was no one on.
Nims has got a interesting reputation on the mountain, let's say that. And they follow the rope fixing team, which is quite frowned upon. But he's Nepal's golden boy at the moment, so no one will tell him not to do it.
Yeah. Oh, I see. He likes to leg it up the mountain, doesn't he? He doesn't. I mean, he's not a guy that would want to queue.
No, and wouldn't queue. Yeah. And
let's give him credit. He has saved a fair few lives from reading his book.
And he's a beast. Like, regardless of what people on the mountain think of him, he's a beast. Yeah, and he has rescued people. It's absolutely true. But if I was to use an operator, I feel a moral obligation to be honest and say I wouldn't use Nims as operator. Let's just leave it there.
Yeah, his guys, they summited Everest, and within 24 hours they were at the top of Lhotse, taking photos of Everest. If you think most people would just dream to get up Everest, and they right, let's get down a pub, let's get back to Kathmandu.
We had two people out of my group of 4 who had paid to do Lhotse right after as well, and once they got up Everest, because high camp's almost the same. Lhotse high camp and Everest high camp's almost the same. So by the time you've done, like, you're on day 47 or 50 or whatever when you have your summit attempt at Everest. So on day 48, for example, then you would come down the mountain. But you could also just go up Lhotse. It's right there. It's only another 6 or 8 hours extra. But you're knackered. It's 6 or 8 hours of climbing a bloody mountain at 8,000 meters after just spending 16 hours doing Everest. But what happened with our two was, like, they were strong climbers too, but they were just like, I don't care. I've climbed Everest. Get me off the mountain. So they just burned 15 grand extra and left. For me, this is my whole life. I'm jumping from this to the next thing, like multiple times per year. So I very much appreciate my time at home, because it'll only be another week or two until I'm doing something horrific again. Whereas a lot of people who do things like Everest and MDS, often that will be the biggest thing they ever do in their life. And they might have been working up to it for years, and it'll be another set of years until they do something else. And to be honest, if people feel unfulfilled by doing that, there's nothing to stop them doing it. You don't need to spend money and fly to Morocco. Like I say, you can put a pair of sneakers on and run 400 kilometers.
Yes.
You know what I mean? There's nothing stopping you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, for the £7,000 that it cost, that's five to get in, and 2,000 for kit and traveling and medicals. And, I bought 3 pairs of trainers just to get one that I thought, right, I think these fit. The others, anyway.
What brand did you use?
I learned a lot about footwear this time.
Yeah.
I went from, bear with me a sec. Great.
I used Salomon.
Okay. I don't think I can use Salomon because I have what I would call normal feet. However, I would say normal feet are wide,
Okay.
and all these other brands are pointy. So Brooks, right? I once did 200 miles in a week for a charity event, and I wore Brooks. I wore those double thickness, double skin socks that do prevent blisters so long as the shoes are wide enough, right? So on that, I was running in the winter, and my feet were fine. I literally ran 200 miles without one single issue whatsoever. So I bought Brooks for this one, and the problem was I'd been wearing Hoka. You know, that's my preferred brand. I like to go barefoot, right? But what happened was I was running barefoot up to like 11 miles around the streets of my city. And at my age, you just can't get away from it doing that to your spine, no matter how you try and plant your foot. And that was what triggered my first ruptured disc. So then I went completely opposite. The first time I put a pair of Hokas on and I went out, I beat my personal best. Because I could just run so much faster in these.
I remember getting my first pair of proper ultra shoes, and now I use those Nike Vaporflies, those pricey ones, and it's like it's heaven. It's heaven. Anything over like 20 miles, having the proper shoes is just an absolute game changer. And the difference between paying like 40 quid and 140 quid is massive.
I went for Hoka. I even got my Brooks with the Velcro around to put the gaiters on. That was, the Brooks are 140 quid. Velcro's another 70 quid. They're still sat in the bedroom, haven't been used. Because I put them on, and compared to the Hokas, it was just, they felt so hard, so much harder. So I bought another pair of Hokas. I bought half a size bigger because I didn't want to go too silly, and I got extra wide. And do you know what? Not wide enough for my feet.
Take them all your feet off. Use that zinc oxide tape to tape your.
I've never done that, and I don't think you need to do it. I think the reason that people end up doing that is that the shoes always push your little toes in. You know, it's like, because you live in Thailand, when you see indigenous people, their toes are like that. They've got space between them all. Like when I worked in Mozambique, my little toes are literally almost hooked over the second toe in, because the shoes I've worn all my life, shoes are pointed. Why are shoes pointed when your feet are shaped like pasties? It doesn't really.
I live my life in flip-flops, so I don't have that issue.
Well, here's the thing. After I'd done the marathon in those extra wide shoes, I couldn't put my old shoes on because my feet had spread out the way they should be. I had to buy like a whole size bigger to get. Sorry, folks, but I hope people find, the runners out there at least, find this fascinating. But one chap in my tent said, "Chris, go Ultra, the brand Ultra." I'd never, and when he showed me, he held them up like that, and they looked like bear's feet. They were literally symmetrical, these big scoopy shoes. And I'm like, yeah, that's what my feet needed. But I had a load of blisters and stuff, and a lot of the lads were spending it, and there is a big part of me thinks just leave them alone and keep running.
Part of the experience, like it's good to suffer. We're getting older now, but it's so important to go through that lesson of suffering on a regular basis. I mean, and how good does a beer taste, or a kiss with your missus, or sitting on your sofa after you've suffered, and after you know what deep suffering, physical suffering is? And for sure, I find so much more joy in my life because I suffer so regularly.
So you've rode the Atlantic?
I have, yeah.
Okay, that's the next project that I'm trying to get online, because I've got a mate that's got a boat, and he actually is talking about coming with me. Hello, Brucey, if you ever get to watch this.
that's half the problem. Is like a lot of these things, the boat is very, very expensive. They're like 40 grand, like 50 grand US maybe. So often when people dream of rowing across an ocean and then they find out the price of the boat, the dream never gets off. You know what I mean? Because it's so expensive. Yeah. And also there's a cliche in the ocean rowing community that's saying that like 99% of the battle is getting to the starting point rather than the actual experience, because it's so hard to organize.
Absolutely.
All the technology you need on the boat, and then the actual boat itself and the cost of it all, it's expensive. Yeah, it's a pretty wild experience.
Did you go solo, Johnny, or were you in a team?
I did it with 3 guys who had never met before, and we just freestyled it in a boat, completely unsupported, not part of the Talisker Challenge or anything. It was genuinely 100% unsupported, just our boat dotted across the ocean, which is quite scary. I mean, I don't come from a background of people who go on boats. I'd never been on a rowboat, sailboat, or anything in my life. And when I signed up for it, I just went to a gym here in Thailand and used the rowing machine, like the gym rowing machine, for like 6 hours a day. And that was my training. So then when I got on the boat, I was like, oh, fucking hell, this is a completely different like movement and everything to what I've been training on.
Did you have to learn seamanship and all that sort of stuff?
Not really. You do bits and bobs of health and safety, but because ours was just literally completely unsupported, like we had no insurance or anything, so we didn't have to worry too much about that kind of stuff. And the boats are supposed to self-right, so it should be all right.
I guess you have a rate. What do you have? I don't even know what.
We had a sat phone.
Sat phone. So if you really get in trouble, you can.
Yeah, there's
call the Coast Guard.
Called Iridium or something. It's really expensive. Though the data is like $2 grand per gigabyte. So, but if it's life and death, you're happy enough to spend it. We got off to an awful start. We left Lanzarote. Was it Lanzarote? Anyway, one of the Canary Islands, just off the coast of Africa, and then we were going to row to Antigua, so across the old Atlantic. And because the boat was a bit fly by night, the whole setup, because it was just 4 guys going, and our boat like broke in the first 24 hours and we had to get rescued by the Spanish Coast Guard. So then we got pulled into Fuerteventura, or one of those other Canary Islands. I'd never been to them before. We had to get, and I actually thought that the whole expedition was going to be over. And we found a guy who had worked with fiberglass before. We paid him for a week to just like hot potch, whatever the verb is, to fix it together. And then a week later, off we went. And then 2 months on the ocean, 54 days or something it took us. Did
you enjoy it?
No. It was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. Something like Everest, where you might die, or like I've done marathons at like the North Pole, and I've cycled from China to Malaysia, and obviously every country thing. I've been in loads of scary situations, and I've been arrested in like 10 countries and all this. And obviously Everest is the chance of dying. Fell in this volcano once and nearly died, and all that kind of stuff. I can get my head around, but I found the claustrophobia and the lack of personal space and the duration really tough mentally to deal with. Physically, I was really strong. I trained really hard for it. But mentally, I found it really tough, because you're in a cabin like this. And the way I describe it to people is that like you do 2 hours rowing and 2 hours resting every 4 hours all through the night, 24 hours a day for 2 months, right? So you're in the middle of the night. So you're sleeping like 30-minute windows. So you're really sleep deprived. And again, I've done lots of long distance running and stuff, so I'm used to that. But when you're resting, you're like this, and there's a guy right beside you, so you're almost touching shoulders. You are touching shoulders, so you're never ever alone, not even for 10 seconds and for 2 months. And I like to process my thoughts, and like I'm like an extroverted introvert, like I need my space. I need to shut the door and process what I'm thinking and my emotions. And I found it very difficult to deal with the reality that for the next 2 months, I'm going to be physically touching another guy with no escape ever. And it's roasting hot as well. And I find it mentally really challenging.
Wow.
And there being no escape.
The boat the boys took me out on a boat, and all these guys are ex-Marines, and they had a cabin at both ends.
Yeah.
So You can have one person.
No, most ocean rowing boats have that, mate. But it's not a cabin; it's a storage normally, unless it's different. But and all your food's in there. It's completely full of your food normally when you're actually rowing
shit.
To the brim with the food, and then obviously you go.
Yeah, that shows you how much I know about it.
It's much, you know, like when I was doing it the first time, because I'm not a good swimmer or anything like that, I was quite happy to do it in a group of 4, and I assumed that doing it solo would be the hardest, doing it in a 2 would be slightly easier, doing it in a 4 would be easier still. And now, retrospectively, with the experience of rowing the Atlantic, doing it in a 2 is the easiest by a mile, and then doing it solo is easier and then 4 is actually the hardest if you've got the same issues as I have. But doing it in a 2 is quite nice because you row while your mate rests, and then he rests on his own. He can recharge as much as he wants. You know what I mean? And then you swap, and that would be much better. And again, doing it solo would also be okay. I would prefer, be scary, of course, being in the middle of the ocean, big waves and getting flipped around and all that. But at least you'd be able to decompress. Even when you're actually rowing, you'd be decompressing, you know, mentally, I mean, not physically. So I actually thought 4, like if I was ever to do something like that again, I wouldn't do it in a 4. I don't know how many people you're thinking about doing it with.
I think we'd be a 4.
Yeah.
But I can see a lot of people do the foursome and then they go on to do the crossing on their own. So there's definitely something in what you're saying. It's certainly the confidence.
The confidence as well. I'm actually organizing because I'm trying to be the first person in history to do every country, 7 summits in North Pole, South Pole. I'm going to finish in December when I'm going off to the South Pole on December 27th. And when I finish, my kind of semi-retirement goal is I want to create 4 like epic events like the Marathon Des Sables, and try to encourage normal people to come and do this wild shit. And I have this brilliant idea that I'm going to do. I'm going to start it next winter called the Triathlon instead of triathlon, because obviously I'm based here. And the Golden Triangle at the north of Thailand, it's where Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand meet near China. And I want to organize an event where it starts there. You cycle 1,000 kilometers to Bangkok. Then you take an ocean rowing boat from Bangkok to Koh Samui, the most famous island. That's another 1,000 kilometers. And then there's a 55-kilometer ring road around Samui, so ultra marathon to finish. And I want to do this like as a big yearly event.
Oh, it sounds awesome.
Yeah,
when you say cool. Golden Triangle, I was thinking you might mean another event then, but snort a line of coke, inject some opium. Sorry, folks.
I don't think you'd be fit for a 1,000K cycle, 1,000K row after that.
And then say, fuck the cycle. How have you managed? You've traveled all these countries. One thing I'll say, because, you know, obviously having traveled pretty extensively myself, the old kind of drug tourism thing it's a big old thing on that circuit, isn't it? You know?
Well, it depends. When you're in Bolivia and Colombia, like I spent a few months in Colombia studying Spanish, and that's obviously a wild place. Cocaine for bloody $3 a gram, and in Bolivia even less. So it's certainly rampant.
I just wanted to ask, how have you kept on top of that sort of?
Yeah, well, you know, like I say, I'm really like a type A personality. So I was on this massive goal to do every country. So a lot of my fitness stuff fell by the wayside from like, I'm 39 now and I finished when I was 34, I think. So from like 23 to 34, I was doing every country. And I was constant. I traveled 9-10 months a year, 2 nights here, 3 nights here, 1 night there for 12 years straight. It's quite brutal, cool, but brutal. And sometimes I'll get really out of shape. Women and booze and drugs, I'll get really out of shape. And like, you know, you always think it's the answer. Like, like when you're stressed, and then women, alcohol, drugs, and then actually that makes you more stressed, more down, you know what I mean? And then you snap out of it. And then, but it's especially being alone in scary countries for months and years on end. Yeah, sometimes I would fall by the wayside, of course. But now I'm a bit older, a bit wiser. Like I'm in fitness and all this ultra like adventure stuff's a big part of my life. So I'm more on the straight and narrow these days. Growing up, not being able to do anything like with my family financially, to be having the opportunities to travel to these extreme places. And also I did a lot of overlanding. I went from Cape Town to Cairo by public transport, and Cape Town to Casablanca by public transport. I went from Alaska to Argentina by public transport. I went from Bangkok to Belfast by public transport. So I did most of it over land, over like each trip like that would be a year. So you've got no choice but to keep moving, and you're also in really obscure places if you're doing it over land as well. You're not just in an obscure country, you're in an obscure place in an obscure country as you overland. And it just felt like, made me feel really alive, you know, like when you're in trying to find out how to get the next bus from some village in Uzbekistan to cross the border into bloody Tajikistan or whatever, you know, it's cool. I felt very grateful to be in those places. And also like people looking at you like they've never seen some pasty white Irishman before. It was a wild decade.
Could you give us an idea of your most dangerous moments?
I mean, many. Like I said, I've been in prison in so many countries, but when I was nearly finished my countries, I'd visited 194, so I had 3 left, and I was saving Norway for a big celebration at the end, a safe, easy one for my mates and family to come and celebrate with me. And I tried and failed to go to Yemen. This was during, like, I know Yemen's sadly still at war, but about 5 years ago, the Saudi-Iran thing was even worse, and Yemen was getting devastated. And I had tried and failed to get into Yemen 5 or 6 times. And the fifth or sixth final time, I actually went to this city in the south of Oman called Salalah with these rich people who were also trying to get to Yemen, and they chartered a plane and let me on it. And we were in the air, and finally I was going to get to Yemen. Like, I'd been trying for over a year, and the Saudi jets turned us over in the middle of the journey and brought us back to Oman. I was like, fuck, I'm actually never going to get in this country. And everyone left, and I just stayed in Salalah. And I said, and they're like, well, we're all leaving. I'm like, I'm not leaving Oman until I get to fucking Yemen. Yeah. And in the end, I ended up hitchhiking on this Indian cargo ship through the Somalian Sea to get to Socotra, an island that belongs to Yemen. And it was...
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the map as you're speaking. I see it.
And I spent 4 days in this cargo ship. Right off the coast of Somalia with all the pirates like ravaging the place, and pretty wild. I was also in Liberia during the Ebola crisis, and I was trying to overland, like I say, from Cape Town to Casablanca up the whole west coast of Africa. And I paid a smuggler to bring me into from Ivory Coast into Liberia, and I got arrested. And I bribed the police chief to let me out, and a different smuggler came and got me and offered me a different route. And then I tried that, and I got arrested and brought back to the same station and spent like time in the prison there. I've been in so many wild places that people would never think to visit unless you're doing these overland trips. I still think in this day and age, like, overland is the way to do it. And I also think like the continent of Africa, in an era like where everyone's in bloody Bali taking photographs of themselves in a bikini, thinking that that's travel. There's still many amazing destinations that haven't been ruined by mass tourism in the continent of Africa, especially in interior Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, still offers that. But it takes a lot of balls, you know? So there's the cost there too.
Yeah, that was like Mozambique. Jesus, God, you get on some of these idyllic beaches, and I arbitrarily 30 miles that way, you're not going to... Well, no, 200 miles that way, you're not going to see any kind of... Certainly no Western commercialism. There might be the odd fishing village that might have a restaurant, but you're on this beautiful beach, and there's just one guy, you know, chucking his fishing nets in. Well, you know, I'm preaching the choir, aren't I? I got an expedition ship to Antarctica, and I'll be honest, I kind of did it more for like a tick in the box because I've seen 6 continents, and I thought, there's no point dying and not seeing 7, is there? And it really was a little bit like I took it for granted. It cost a lot of money because I had to buy all the scuba diving equipment and specialist equipment you need down there, and specialist training. But the second we set sail from Ushuaia, and I met this wonderful Aussie chap and a Russian chap sharing a cabin, I just suddenly realized this is the best trip I've ever done. It was utterly incredible. You look out your porthole in the morning and there's an iceberg floating by, It's like the size of Belgium.
Yeah.
And gosh, it was just incredible. But how did you get? I know you've been there twice, or you're gonna go again.
Yeah, so I've also been on one of those expedition boats from Ushuaia, but this time I'm going to the South Pole, like I'm to climb the highest mountain in Antarctica as well. It's called Vincent Massive. So I'll be there for 5, 6, 7 weeks or whatever in the cold in the interior of Antarctica. Because with that boat, I also thought it was pretty cool, but you only really get to the peninsula, the Antarctica Peninsula. But it's just so expensive. Like, as you say, those boats are like 10 grand or whatever. And then to go deeper, it just gets exponentially more expensive. So I understand why people don't go to the interior, but I want to be the first person to do this stuff, right? So I've got to.
Well, we have no doubt you will. But I say we went down as far as the polar circle. I don't know what degree latitude that is, or is it longitude? I never know which one's which. And so what am I saying? So there's me, forget the scuba diving, but for the actual passage, I think it was about £5,000.
Which company? Quark?
It was called Ocean Wide Expeditions, I believe they were called. It was an interesting expedition. Our first scuba dive, one of our dive buddies drowned, which was just, it's like you say, isn't it? It's, you got to. There were people that clearly weren't prepared to dive in Antarctica, basically. But I encourage a lot of people, because there's all this talk of flat Earth at the moment. And I say to these people, like, if you believe it's just an ice wall, if you're going to spend your whole life believing that, why don't you just go get to Ushuaia? You could probably get there a cheap flight for 400 quid. You can walk into a travel agent and ask for a cancellation space on an expedition ship where someone's cancelled. And there were people on my expedition that had paid like 1,600 quid for their passage, So for $2,000, you get down there, and folks, the first thing you step ashore on is rocks. It's a continent, It's sorry, I'm not trying to upset anyone here. And all the stories and the history that you get as they do lectures all the way down there, and you meet all these fascinating explorers, and it just gives you a bit of perspective on life, can we say? That when I see people arguing on the internet, like they clearly haven't got, and I just wouldn't put my whole, like I'm well, I call myself friends with Serrano Fines.
Wow.
He when I ran the length of the country for to raise awareness of veterans issues, he sent me a signed copy of one of his books, and I went to see him when he came to speak down in the Southwest, and I contacted him recently about this issue, because are you familiar with his Transglobe expedition?
The one that you went long ways instead of round ways?
Yeah, long ways, all the way around the planet. Actually they fundraised to buy a ship to drop them at one side of Antarctica, so they crossed it, picked them up the others. And a lot of people aren't aware that these sort of, that they did this. But yeah. I wanted him to come on the show and talk about it, but he laughed at me when I said, "Do you know about FE?" He was like, "What?" I said, "There's this massive movement that folks have got to be careful what I say, because this is now taboo to talk about on certain platforms." And I said, "Yeah, there's a massive movement in the world that believe that a certain planet is shaped, like," and he was like, "Fuck off."
Of all the people to say it to, though, the one guy who can certainly tell you for sure that it's not the case.
I'll be honest. I've said this to two people that I've known that have been around the, certainly crossed that. I know two people that have crossed all the way across Antarctica. You know, from exclude one of them excluding the ice shelves, but obviously Saran's done the ice shelves as well. And I might be getting my expletives mixed up between explorers here, folks. I think Saran's a little bit more refined, but he was just like, nonsense. Like, no, honestly. Oh, well, I said, will you come on the show? He said, no. I said, is there anything you can say that I could say to people that are going to spend their whole lives believing in this theory? And I don't tell people what to believe. I'm just saying this is...
Well, let me tell you, mate. I can tell you, I can also guarantee, I rowed from Africa to the Americas, and my skipper on that boat has rowed from the Americas to Australia. So it's been proven many a times. Like, there's nothing to stop someone rowing from Africa or Europe to the Americas and then manually crossing the continent and then rowing again on the other side. No one's done that in one unbroken loop, but many people have done it in sections. So, I mean, that ship has sailed quite literally.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Well, this is your podcast. Let's not talk about that. But it is a funny one. The rhetoric that you see online, you can see how people believe it, and it's kind of, when you come up with a theory like this, then it's quite easy to make the evidence seem to support it.
The world's such a beautiful place, and with the internet now has basically removed everyone's excuse as to why they've failed in their goals and their dreams, right? Anyone can make money online. Anyone can access unlimited education online. And we all start as children with dreams to live these big, grand lives full of adventure and success. And lots of people reach 50, 60, 70 years old and they've done nothing with their life. And they find some esoteric plan that they can cling to, where they find ownership and camaraderie, and that's their way of feeling fulfilled.
Yes,
and it's sad, but if it gives them some kind of peace, whatever, good luck to them.
Well, yeah. I just say, I just don't understand, if you're that convinced and that upset and angry about it, and you feel that why don't you just get together with a bunch of these, do a crowdfunder and get a plane to, there's air bases on Antarctica, aren't there? There's airstrips and they're expensive, folks. Not going to say they're not, but you could hop. You could plan a hop across the continent, and then you'd be like, right, okay, now I can go on and live my life and not. But
they don't really want to do that, though, do they? Because they have the fear, of course, that they're going to be disproved.
Well, I guess, yeah, that's a good point.
And then they've pinned their colours to the mast, and they're going to feel like morons. Why would they risk that? Let them stay in their little echo chamber and have their little meetups and pretend that they're intellectually superior. I mean, that's a much more preferable situation for them to find themselves in than being faced with the reality that they're wrong.
I can see, as a global traveler, that you've come across this before. I'm the same. I say, folks, I've sat on you sit on the beach in Mozambique, and literally within half an hour, you've seen, God knows how many satellites tracking over. You don't know who made them. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, Johnny, last question then is something I get asked a lot. What's been your favorite place? I'm guessing Thailand, because that's where you're sat now.
Yeah, it's different though, isn't it? It's a very difficult question to answer, because does it mean your favorite place to visit, your favorite place to live? I personally think the best place in the world to live is Chiang Mai, which is the kind of capital of Thailand's north, and that's where I've come and built my house. Like, when I was broke, when I came out of uni, I came and taught English in the north of Thailand for a year. And then I went off to continue this every country in the world thing. And then I started my blog, and then I started making money again. And then once I was making money online, I was free to live anywhere. And I'd been to every country, and I've chosen to be in the north of Thailand. So I mean, the proof's in the pudding from my personal beliefs. It's lovely climate, warm culture, great cost of living, very accessible. You're only 45 minutes flight from Bangkok, 20 quid flight from Bangkok, and then you can go anywhere. I personally think it's huge. There's a huge digital nomad, like online working scene here, where like there's thousands and thousands of foreigners who are working in online businesses. So it's got a nice entrepreneurial side, full of coffee shops and cool bars. I love it here.
Oh, I'm so pleased for you. Johnny, have you got children at all?
No, but I got married about 18 months ago, and we're going to hopefully have kids next year.
Okay. Do you think you'll tame things down a bit then, or you're not going to? You can't answer that, mate, because you haven't had them yet.
Yeah, true. I mean, I'm not going to do 9 months away every year like I normally do. I won't do that, but I'll still be doing, like, when I get frustrated about or bored of normal life, like I'll still fly to New York and cycle to San Francisco. You know what I mean? I've created a life where I've got the freedom to do that. I don't want to suddenly restrict myself. And hopefully, as long as business ticks over nicely, I can bring my family for those kind of stuff, or certainly at the beginning and the end. Let's see. I would imagine I'll always spend a month or two away each year doing cool stuff. And I run a lot of trips, both with a charity that I own and a lot of tourism to like obscure places through my blog. So I'll continue to do that. Like in September, next 2 or 3 months, I've got a load of trips to Iraq, Turkmenistan, Mali. I'm doing a big charity cycle across Jordan, raise money for Parkinson's with my mom and 20 people. And I'll always do that kind of stuff. Keeps me alive.
Brilliant. And this chat, mate, it's been fascinating. Thank you, Johnny. It's inspirational, you could say.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you.
Stay on the line, mate, so I can thank you properly. But we're going to put all your social media below this, below the podcast. Wonderful stuff. You know, you're such a nice chap, and you've got out there and you smashed a few goals. And I hope. Yeah, be incredibly proud. Don't forget always to take time out and reflect on what you've achieved, because you know our mind is always on the next challenge, isn't it?
That's the curse, isn't it?
Yes. To our friends at home, hope you found that as utterly fascinating as I have. If you could like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share the video, and much love. We'll see you next time.